A very good evening to you. Thank you very much for joining us for this edition of Spectrum Extra, live on Radio 1 FM 90. We're broadcasting live from the Central Building here in the heart of our city, Kampala, but we're also coming to you live on our website, which is www.radio1fm90.com. Radio 1 is also live on the different radio listening apps. You can obtain those from the Google Store of your smartphone. You download any of the apps, look for Radio 1 FM 90, and as long as you have an internet connection, you'll be able to listen to us. We also give you the other option of listening to this radio station via your TV set. That's if you have a DSTV connection, you look for audio channel 897. Today being a Friday, we are reviewing the major events of the week. One, we are going to look at how Parliament arrived at the decision to rationalize UCDA, but also other agencies, including UNRWA, during this week. We know what transpired in the House. Well, if you didn't, there was tension in the House. There was heavy deployment inside and outside of Parliament. We saw what happened inside, including the fact that plainclothes security people entered into the chamber and evicted MPs that had been named by the Speaker. The opposition has complained about who those particular people were, but according to Parliament, Parliament has a robust security system, and those are members of the security system that the members of the opposition do not know. But we also saw an incident where fellow MPs were boxing each other. We saw that knockout from Killer County MP Anthony Akol, who boxed Mityana Municipality MP Francis Zake. Francis Zake was taken to the hospital in Zambia. A number of things happened in there, but eventually the opposition walked out. The NRM took the day. They actually voted in favor of rationalizing UCDA and taking it back to the mother ministry, that is the Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Industry and Fisheries. One notable opposition MP remained in the House, and that was Nathan Nandala Mafabi from the Bugisu Union. We know very well the connection that Nandala has with the coffee in that particular area. He remained in the House and was praised by the Speaker for staying around to help the House to process that particular bill. Well, President Yoweri Museveni did address the country yesterday, and his focus was on this issue. He accused the opposition of allegedly politicking. He actually said those that misled the public should be punished at the next election. He said if it was possible, they would look for even legal means of actually punishing them. Of course, the debate is out there whether what the government has done is right. As President Yoweri Museveni says, UCDA was parasitic, and that through rationalization of all government entities that have been highlighted, the country will be saving over 1 trillion shillings. We'll be looking at that issue in detail. Well, this week, another key event happened, and that was the elections in the U.S. Donald Trump, that so many people had dismissed, emerged victorious. By close of business today, he had collected 295 electoral votes, while Vice President Harris had managed 226 votes, which is about 48%. Trump also beat Harris in the popular vote. He scored 73.4 million votes, and that's 51%, while Harris got 68 million votes. Well, more votes are actually being tallied, and it's not yet clear where Trump will end, but what we can tell you, he has already clinched the presidency, and he's already organizing a transition team. The biggest discussion there for us as Africans is what does this mean for the African continent? Looking at how we rely on the US for trade, aid, there are issues to do with immigration, security and conflict, but not forgetting the increasing China and Russian influence on the continent. What is likely to happen in that particular regard? How will Trump respond to Africa? We remember very well in January 2018, to be exact, on the 12th of January 2018, he was speaking about issues to do with immigration, and he said, why allow immigrants from shithole countries? And he was referring to some countries in Africa where very many people were coming from, going to the US. That statement, of course, caused an uproar, but some people have actually said nobody can change the US foreign policy, and therefore not much is expected. Africa will still be considered as a major partner because of trade. The US is looking for raw materials, but also because of strategic security. We know that one of the countries that is actively playing a key role in that particular area is our country, Uganda as a key partner in the war against terror, and we have boots on the ground in Somalia. So I have a panel of 4, the 3 are already here. Let me introduce the guests. Dr. Yusuf Serunkuma, political economist, researcher, and pundit on governance issues. He is also a columnist with the Observer newspaper. Good evening, Dr. Yusuf Serunkuma. Thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Good evening, Comrade Anderson. Thank you so much for having me.
Also in studio, Mr. Augustine Utuko, private secretary to the President Yoweri Museveni. He's in charge of political affairs. He's also a research and a Pan-Africanist. Good evening, Mr. Utuko. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening, Anderson. Thank you for inviting me back here for a conversation about our country.
Mr. Job Kija, governance expert, associate director at Innovations for Democracy Engagement and Action IDEA. Good evening, sir. Thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Spectrum Extra.
Thank you, Anderson. Good evening, listeners and viewers of Spectrum tonight.
Well, my name is Kenneth Lukwagandason, your host, and gentlemen, let's get this ball rolling. And I'll begin with you, Mr. Otuko. You come from the presidency. This matter of rationalization has been going on for quite some time. Actually, the president complained yesterday that it has taken the country about 7 years having this matter sorted out. And some people were wondering and saying, how can it take 7 years? And also the rationale of knocking out some agencies that some people actually think are still useful. The president insisting, meeting the NRM caucus the other day, rallying the troops and telling them this must be done. What is the matter?
Thank you very much, Anderson. The president has been very clear for some time that by 1986, NRM inherited an enclave economy of 3 C's. That is coffee, cotton, and copper, and the 3 T's, and that is tea, tobacco, and tourism. To him, as NRM, we believe that this was deliberate by the neo-colonialists to lock our minds into specifically 6 items in the country as the only commercial items that we're looking at that time. Eventually, of course, NRM embarked on a journey to ensure that, first of all, they revive the 6, and that was the cotton, coffee, and copper. They also engaged in how to skyrocket tourism, tea production, and tobacco. Eventually, as we progressed beyond 1996, that was 10 years of the movement in Uganda, the NRM started expanding, getting out of the locker room of the 6 economic items, that is the 3 C's and TC's. Eventually, we got into milk, we got into soya and cattle, and so many other things that the president enumerated, including millet and so many other things that the country is now exporting and is earning foreign exchange out of them. Now, the question was, at the time of creation of some of these agencies, were they necessary? The answer is yes. When NRM embarked on economic recovery and eventually ensuring that we expand our GDP, I think it was important at that time to ensure that we created some of these agencies. But as time passed on, a review was carried out, as the president stated in his address, that by 2017, the head of state clearly stated that there was a report presented to him by Operation Wealth Creation in 2017 that was carrying a review of some of these agencies to determine whether they were objectively still necessary for the country. And I think the report indicated to him that some of the agencies were no longer necessary because there was too much overspending by government in some of these agencies. The president stated that the money going to ministries was about 2.6 trillion, and the money going to agencies was about 2.2 trillion. calling for a necessity to review whether it was necessary to continue having these items. And now that we have expanded our economic items that we are engaging in, the question would be, which the president has asked, is whether it is still necessary to have an authority that can run only one item in the country. And I think the president says no. We could actually have an authority that could have crops together, because now you have expanded even the crops that used to be for consumption only, are now some of them being used for commercial purposes. So he's saying that yes, at the time of creation of UCDA, for example, it was necessary. But now that we have expanded the economy and expanded our commercial base in terms of the items of agriculture that we are engaging in, I think it would be necessary to review our first decision of having only one item have an authority, and create an authority that can be able to deal with several crops, for example, in maybe crop production, then have another agency that could look at animals and so many others. So I believe basically this is what the president is saying. The president is not removing UCDA because maybe it is targeting specific individuals. No. The president is simply saying, can we streamline now that we have several agencies? Because you cannot have an agency for millet, you have another one for rice, another one for coffee, another one for cotton, and so on and so on. So basically, this is what the president is saying.
But through this process, was there an opportunity for people to be listened to? Because we have seen people who are actually involved in the coffee value chain saying what the president is doing is not right. There were people who were with the president at the time this process was beginning, Dr. Xtra Suruma, Honorable Victoria Sechituleko, and a number of people who have come up and said, we are making a huge mistake. But the president has remained adamant.
I believe the report that I've looked at was comprehensively detailed, and several agencies, including UCDA, was engaged at that time. And we realized that when you read that report of OWC presented in 2017, you can actually realize that they raised a concern of duplication. And when they looked at the Ministry of Agriculture having extension workers up to every sub-county, their recommendation was that we simply need to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of Ministry of Agriculture and get rid of some of these agencies. So the question of consultation, I think, was extensively done by Operation Wealth Creation.
So Operation Wealth Creation and not the public service, because earlier we had been told that the analysis had been done by public service.
Well, when you see what the president says, he says the first report that he received was by Operation Wealth Creation.
All right,
then eventually, he says he was not convinced in the beginning, and he had to task other individuals within the public service to examine the proposals that were made by Operation Wealth Creation. And eventually, he says he was convinced, but when they produced the figures that were presented to him.
And Operation Wealth Creation, just for the record, is the Kapeka group, not so?
I do not know how you call them Kapeka group, but they have the headquarters in Kampala.
All right, let's move on. Let's hear from Yusuf Serunkoma. Yeah, we've at least gotten a background to what we've been going through, rationalization,
you've gotten a political background.
Rethinking how the government is working, and the idea is to cut down the costs and also streamline to ensure that, we have an organized way of doing things. Your quick take on this.
First of all, the money bit is not a fair way to begin this conversation. I think we all agree that UCDA was not a cost on the National Treasury. In fact, it brought in more money than it was taking out. So that the figures are out there. It brought in 80 billion Uganda shillings, 2023, 2024, and the budget allocation is 45. In fact, UCDA, if we went to the point, because it attracted many willing funders and interest from many groups, to the point that it can even forego the 45 billion allocation and run on its own. Okay, it received some money from the European Union, from other interested investors because of the work it's been doing. So money, it's not a fair way to say it was a cost to the Treasury. So I think we need to get that clear. But understand what we're dealing with here is...
So you do not agree with the president that actually the boom that we're talking about in the coffee subsector is not entirely because of UCDA? Because he seems to attribute that to other agencies, including the Minister of Agriculture itself.
Anderson, first of all, the president has failed to craft a coherent argument for the dissolution of the UCDA. He's contradicted himself, confused himself. At one point, New Vision ran a headline suggesting that the problem with UCDA was because it took over the job of Uganda Revenue Authority collecting a tax from the coffee farmers, right? So he struggled to convince himself. Yesterday, he assembled a team of haters, people to blackmail UCDA. Basically, that's what happened yesterday. So he had all these hangers on going bombastic about UCDA, saying they failed to do this, they failed to do that, they failed to do this. So basically, we don't know what is the problem.
He talked about corruption also.
Look, at one point, I'm saying how he's failed to craft an argument, a coherent line of argumentation to say this is why I need UCDA dissolved. It was failure to deliver, say seedlings to the farmers, right? And by his own, I think the first original speech, he said when the soldiers came into the thing, when the Operation Evacuation came into it, he messed it up. By his own admission, UCDA did much better than OWC. Do you see? So in the course of these many speeches, I think it comes with old age and many maybe speech writers, you end up contradicting yourself, confusing yourself, and confusing the general public to the point that you even miss what was the original point you're pushing. So what was the point of yesterday's meeting? To tell us that, UCD is doing so bad? See, Anderson, the economists spoke. People who went to school and studied the function of the economy. Right? Farmers spoke. People who were directly involved in the business of growing and selling coffee. Coffee traders spoke. People whose daily business is working with coffee and trading and vending the beans. Institutions which rely on the goodwill of the public spoke. All of them spoke in favor of UCDA staying. That those that have hands-on experience, trained in running the economy, farmers who are doing the day-to-day running of the business, they spoke to say we have immensely benefited from UCDA. There's a farmer from Osaka who, he said UCD understood all these accusations of not delivering seedlings to farmers are baseless. UCD understood that the problem with our value chain is not the farmer, it's in the shipment and moving to the processing plant. So it focused its energies on those two.
And the president is saying those functions are actually not being phased out. What UCD has been doing is simply being transferred into the ministry, and there will be maximum supervision to ensure that nothing is lost.
So Anderson, let's do this again. Let's do this again. I said again, the farmers spoke, the traders spoke, the economists spoke.
And even the politicians.
Listen.
The politicians spoke. Buganda Kingdom also spoke.
A soldier whose job is soldiering and running militaries, a proud cattle keeper, seems to craft a superior argument against all those who are involved in this business. So the point I wanted to make is that we're not dealing with a technical argument. This argument is not technicality to say where is our value, how do we benefit. It's not a technical argument. We've entered the terrain of power and violence. You see, we need to understand that coffee is politics, right? It's not simply a crop. Coffee is politics. Coffee is income. The entirety of Idi Amin's government, with all the sanctions that Mzungu threw onto this government between the 8 years of Amin's government, they really sanctioned Idi Amin into poverty. They didn't not only badmouth him, but they also sanctioned him. But they still needed Amin's coffee, and the government stayed in power for those 8 years because it was selling coffee. 95% of our income around that time was from coffee. So what we're dealing with is we have entered the terrain of politics, right? As he said, the man from the president's office, as he said, around the 1990s, Museveni was gambling with alternative crops, right? You remember Kulima Osanyi? We're gambling with all these things. We sort of thought, after years of fighting and Moringa, we're gambling really with many other alternatives, but coffee remains a big deal, right? So maybe I'll come to that later, but Now we've entered a terrain that coffee is actually working. Coffee is actually working. Like, actually, people have money from coffee. The volumes have gone up. And by some benevolence, there's a market out there, right? So now you enter the political terrain that he who controls the means of subsistence controls the voices of the people. You know what Marx told us, that men make their decisions depending on the material conditions which they live. Our political decisions are crafted within the material conditions which we live. And whoever is in power often wants to control the material conditions which people live. This is the terrain in which we're having this conversation. We're not talking technical things. We're talking power and violence.
All right, Spectrum Xtra on Radio 1 FM 90. That's the voice of Dr. Yusuf Serunkuma. Also in studio, we have Mr. Agustin Otuko, who is from the President's Office, where he's a private secretary to the President in charge of political affairs. We also have Mr. Job Kija, governance expert, associate director at the Innovation for Democracy Engagement and Action Idea. We expect a fourth guest when he walks into the studio. I will introduce him. But let's go for a break now. When we return, we'll dig deeper into this subject matter with the views from Job Kija. Stay tuned to Radio 1 FM 90 and keep your comments coming via the WhatsApp line 0703 090 090.
Spectrum Xtra, Fridays 7 to 9 p.m. on Radio 1 FM 90.
Thank you so much for staying with us on Spectrum Xtra. Review the major events of the week. At the moment, we are looking at the final decision on UCDA and how Parliament handled the matter. My guest this evening, Mr. Job Kija, governance expert, associate director at Innovations for Democracy Engagement and Action. Mr. Agustin Otuko, private secretary to the President in charge of political affairs. Dr. Yusuf Serunkuma, political economist, researcher, and pundit on governance issues, who is also a columnist with the Observer newspaper. We expect another guest to join us. When he gets here, I will introduce him. Job, let's hear from you. You followed closely what happened in the House and how the House arrived at this particular process. There are arguments for and against dealing away with UCDA. We have heard so many about that. But let's move on and look at your view in that regard. What exactly is your take?
Yusuf has really brought out the point that I wanted to make.
He has broken the atom.
When you look at what's going on, and not just with coffee, but the entire RAPEX exercise, this is clearly a political thing. Of course, the president is giving his arguments, and I think Augustine has given us the history of this, that, you know, there's a report by OWC, and then a report by Public Service, and then they are making the claim that the RAPEX exercise is actually supposed to be helping us to save on the cost of service delivery or even the cost of public expenditure. Well, I want to declare that I have been one of the proponents as part of my work of reduction of the cost of public expenditure. And we have time and again raised concerns about the blank check that the president has had, which he has used to create so many agencies, including those that don't even have any formal instruments that are creating them. If you look at the place where Augustine comes from, State House, there are just too many things that are created that are parallel to the official institutions that we have. If you look at corruption, there are just too many right now. Recently, we heard that there's a unit that is investigating the Electoral Commission, and I've been wondering, where is this unit coming from? Is it IGG? Is it CMI? Is it CID? Because these are the entities that ordinarily should actually be conducting such an investigation, and I failed to get the name of those institutions, of the institution that is actually conducting that investigation. So, saving on the cost of public expenditure, rationalization, in principle would be a good thing. But the question is, you see, for me, lately, having followed our politics, I have come to a point whereby each time this government introduces something, I ask the question, what is the devil in this thing? And if you look at RAPEX, you realize that the institutions, especially where there's been a lot of contention, that are being forced where there's been some sort of pushback. These are entities that are actually performing well, whose corporate governance is really outstanding compared to the ministries where they are pushing them. You will find that actually the manner in which those places are managed compared to the way these authorities or these institutions are run, there's a huge variance. So one would wonder, why would UCDA, an entity that is being run so professionally, where there is overwhelming evidence from the farmers, from the traders, from even entities like the Buganda Kingdom that have been at the forefront of the crusade of Emwanyi Terimba, for instance, which have really put the coffee crop or products on the global map, would then be forced to actually merge back. Now, I want to agree with Yusuf that we are dealing with a political issue, whereby, you see, we are at a point where we're heading to 40 years, okay? We have been going through 40 years of gambling. You remember we started with privatization, then after privatization we started creating these authorities, and now Augustine was telling us that the authorities have...
we started with barter trade.
We started with barter trade, okay.
We went into PMA, Plan for Modernization of Agriculture.
PMA.
We did in Tandikwa and a couple of other things there.
Yeah. So right now they are telling us that, you know, these authorities have actually performed their function. We now need to get rid of them. On the contrary, what we are not getting is a scientific report on what the gains have been with these authorities and what the challenges or the losses have been with these authorities. Yusuf is telling us that actually UCDA brought in 80 point something billion.
80 billion Uganda shillings.
Billion shillings.
And the president is saying it's not only UCDA.
Yeah, but you see, it is only him who is saying that, and he's not giving us evidence. The evidence of that, the evidence shows the contrary.
The evidence is based on the report that Otuko was quoting.
I wish that report could actually be made public,
That they
and then we look at
they
it.
only have it.
And then we look at it. So for me, actually, the devil that I want to bring out here is the political.
What is the political in this?
The political is that, you see, these authorities that have been run professionally, in a way, have actually been a bit problematic in terms of pushing through the interests of the president, who clearly is also getting tired. 40 years, you're trying to entrench the regime further. You are getting concerned of what the next 10 years would look like. So you want to get a stronger grip onto entities like that. Remember, UCDA was very critical in the Pineti coffee saga. I don't know if I remember that. Now, in order...
you're suggesting that UCDA spoke out?
Yeah, of course they did. Of course they did, in whichever ways. Okay? Now, with UCDA, that is an entity which is... Let me ask one question, for instance. There's licensing at UCDA. Okay? In order for that licensing to happen, there's a process that it has to go through. Okay? Which process is managed by the corporate governance at UCDA. With a report that must be provided, whereby for a license to be issued, is not just one officer that sits down and signs. Okay, it probably is presented to a board. I don't know what goes on there, but my limited understanding of corporate governance is that there should be
a professional way of doing things.
Yes, a professional of doing things. A sitting whereby at least 2 to 3 members
take a decision,
look at your application, and they make a decision. If you take this to the ministry, the person responsible for that
will be a commissioner.
Which commissioner, the president can just pick up the phone and say, I don't want Yusuf to get a license, and Yusuf will not be licensed.
And the president can still do the same with UCDA because he appoints them.
But you see, whereby he has to deal with more than one person, he has to call all these different individuals, because we have seen instances where entities that are run more professionally, actually there's pushback on such requests.
So you're suggesting that there are some institutions in this country that cannot take orders from the president. Is that what you're saying?
Actually, what I am saying is that there are some institutions, because of the manner in which they are run,
They can't.
the president will find it more difficult to push through a decision that he wants.
All right.
But with the ministry, it is simply a phone call saying, Augustine, you're the commissioner, I want this to happen, and it will happen.
Mr. Tuko, very quickly.
Let's
hear from
some
let's
small
hear from
information
Tuko.
to this point
Okay,
to
very quickly.
make it stronger.
Mm.
It's not really just the president. You know, there's some like middle-brow, political, powerful people, but mid-range, who double as, you know, traders, and they also make phone calls to these institutions. So those mid-range people are the ones who mess up industries, are the ones who mess up corporations. Now, those can't easily make phone calls where there is a body and not an individual.
All right.
I think that's a good point.
All right, Mr. Tuko, how would you respond to some of these issues? If what these gentlemen are actually saying is true, then there could be a problem.
Well, you see,
First of all, they are raising issues to do with the ministry. The ministries are not well run, and therefore they are likely to be spoilers. They are talking about a system to do with issues of certification and standardization. They're saying these things may not easily happen at the ministry. The president might have responded to some of those issues.
yes, he did.
Yeah.
You see, the president is very clear on the issues of coffee. By 1986, when the president came
Where are
into
you
power,
taking us to 96?
Uganda was,
Let's go.
86.
earning
Let's stay there.
about $2 million.
Mm.
$2 million.
From coffee?
Yes.
Or from exports?
From exporting coffee.
Okay.
Tell us more. How many farmers?
And,
Tell us more statistics about the time. How many
yes,
farmers?
I'm coming to
How
that.
many farmers? How
So-
the population of the country?
So, of course, aware of the history of our country, the instability and so much, you can say at that time, the president, these figures I'm giving were given by the president, $2 million.
But give us more figures, please.
Well, today, yes, I will. Yes, I will, doctor. So today,
Dr. Yusuf,
Uganda is earning.
kindly relax.
Yes. Today Uganda is earning $900 million from coffee. And how did this did not come from nowhere. It took the effort and investment of all stakeholders, including government.
Including UCDA.
Yes, including UCDA, that was created by NRM as a vehicle to promote coffee. So, in other words, the investment
Was
of
UCDA created by NRM by the government?
NRM government.
Okay.
Yes, it was created. It was created by NRM government. So basically, what I'm saying is that the creation of UCDA at that time came as a result of ministries that were ineffective at that time. They were not well staffed. There were very few professionals at that time. There were no extension workers in every sub-county, and so on and so forth. So government decided to create a vehicle to ensure that they could deliver what they wanted to deliver in order to help Uganda recover from the enclave economy.
The same government which was running those ministries had to create another vehicle.
Well, remember, the public service was inherited by NRM from the previous government, because NRM did not come from the bush with the public service. So there was inefficiency at that time, arising from individuals who had left the ministries, people who had abandoned the jobs because of the instability, others, and so on and so forth. There were different factors that led to inefficiency of ministries at that time. Now that, of course, the president clearly indicates that due to the stability that the country has enjoyed and the interventions the NRM made from UCDA, OWC, and so on, because if you remember the history of how coffee became very prominent, it was actually not solely an initiative of UCDA, because there was a direct initiative by OWC focusing on families that participated in the bush war in Luero. It was a deliberate attempt by OWC to distribute seedlings to those families, to ex-combatants at that time. So UCDA became a vehicle to help OWC deliver. And I think they were working hand in hand with government. Now, to say that the UCDA was operating and has been able to deliver without the hand of government, I think it would be wrong. So my view is that UCDA has been able to perform because of direct investment by government, and I think this investment is not going to leave. It will also continue in the ministry that is going to absorb UCDA.
Mr. Tuko,
now,
when you speak to some NRM people, including some members of cabinet, they actually tell you there are problems with the ministry. Inefficiency. I have had people on this table. We have also heard from the president, who has also talked about inefficiency, and he was saying, if UCDA is being run very well, why not transfer those good things from UCDA and take them to the ministry so that the inefficiency can end across board? Is there any plan to actually streamline the ministries or even deal with what Job was actually saying? Some people have actually said we can save much more if we streamlined the political aspects of the government.
Kenneth,
yes.
Someone recently said that actually the ministry should be taken and run under UCDA.
The ministry should go to UCDA.
Those are opinions of individuals. But what I want to say is that
What have you heard in the corridors?
we may not rule out the concerns of people because we do not know what they have experienced with the ministries. But I think the process of rationalization is well intentioned.
Let me point to you some of the issues. Let me
yes.
point to you some of the issues that people have talked about here on this table. One, the fisheries. See the chaos that is in the fisheries. We have a minister, we have commissioners, we have even an institute that deals with fisheries. But the fisheries department is at the moment most likely being run by the army, if you see what is happening. And people are saying, how can you deal with that? Other people have been talking about a foot and mouth disease. That particular sector of animal husbandry, where we have had outbreaks. And they're saying the ministry has failed to deal with that problem, which has been with us for quite some time. And they're saying now you're taking their coffee, you're going to create more disaster.
Well, you see, the concerns of the people cannot be ruled out. But I know that government has made several efforts in these ministries. For example, in the Ministry of Agriculture, we have the issue of foot and mouth disease. A lot of interventions have been made. And recruitments were done up to sub-county level. In my sub-county, I no longer need to call a DVO in order to come and attend to my cows. I just simply call a veterinary officer at extension level at sub-county.
That's because you're in the president's office.
Not really, because this is what is happening. The communities have been able to work with extension workers.
How many local farmers have that contact that you'll be calling?
Yes, you see, the issue here is the concerns of the population should now be shifted in challenging the ministry to ensure that it performs better, in my view. But the concept of rationalizing is a good concept.
All right, Yusuf.
A quick clarification. People tend to, reproduce half figures of coffee growth. You talk about money. How much were you earning? 2 million against
$2 million
against $900
million.
Then go back and talk about all the figures about that time. The population in 1986 was slightly over 10 million people. Now it says maybe 45. You know how many were growing coffee then?
There were very few.
Yeah, no,
there were very few. Why?
Be
Because
precise. No,
yes.
be precise. You know the money.
Yes.
How many were growing coffee then?
They were mainly people from Buganda.
Be precise. How many? Because you know the money. Why don't you bother to know how many were growing fake coffee then?
I do not have the figures here.
1.2 million people are growing coffee.
1.2.
Now they are 12.
12 million.
So you need to work with all the figures. You see, when you say it was $2 million US then, and now it's 900 million, you're giving us half statistics.
Maybe it's about,
let me finish this one.
As a political economist, maybe this is about market forces. The demand for coffee on the global market increased, which also pushed for more production, and hence the rise in the number of people producing coffee in Uganda.
You have to have all the statistics in context, so that if you talk about money and you want us to juxtapose just money, you're being disingenuous.
All right.
Talk about every single thing that speaks about the time.
All right.
You talk about the 86. We had been in a war in Uganda for the last 5 years by Museveni's men. So the coffee sales, if they were as low as 2 million, we were in war in the most region which grown coffee. So you have to have like an entire understanding of the period before you juxtapose just the figures of money.
All right.
But Anderson, there's a bigger dilemma I want to point you to.
Very quickly.
It's not really small because I need to tell a bit of a story. One of the challenges of our privatization drive in 1990, when we disbanded agencies such as UCDA, because UCDA is just a remake. of Coffee Marketing Board.
Mm.
When we disbanded those things, we didn't have a law. I realize it now, because I've lived in Europe and they have such laws. We didn't have a law which bars public servants from gambling as private investors. You see, and you have this reproduced across.
So when you're in government, you shouldn't be doing business.
Because you see, look at the Ministry of Education, for example. You have people who are meant to be working for the public schools. They're themselves investors in private schools. So they're
not even taking their children
so
to
their
public
interest
schools.
in pushing public schools is actually, business-wise, they want the public school to perform poorly so that people can come to the private school. Look at the medical industry too. Our medical doctors are also investors in pharmacies and clinics. So their drive to push people to the public hospital is very low, because you want these people to come to your private facility. It's everywhere. Look, our engineers in UTL, which is a government thing, are the same engineers for the private companies, MTN and Airtel. You see, so double loyalty. So the thing is tackling MIF, that people who are public servants in MIF are doubling as would-be, wannabe exporters of coffee. And so if you have a body such as UCDA, which is very stringent on licensing, on certifying coffee, and you think you are a big drum in MIF, and you make a phone call, it doesn't go through, you're more than likely be like, maybe this should be dissolved. And then you come to the people who are taking most money in coffee, the advisors to the president. These are advisors to the president, which means they hold public office. People like the man who went and started a coffee bar in Belgrade. He holds public office. He should be barred from trying to be an investor, a private investor. You see, like, you should be barred as a public servant from trying to be a front to push a private person. There should be a law, because you see, in Europe, which is really fascinating, if you have a clinic, you can't be selling medicines in a clinic. So if you run a clinic, you can't run a pharmacy alongside, because the penchant for prescribing drugs that people may not need goes high, because you have a clinic. You'll be saying, buy this drug. So if you run a clinic, you can't run a pharmacy. If you run a clinic, you can't work in a public hospital. So that, but you see, right now we are stuck in a moment where many people alleged in public service are trying to be private investors too. So when an institution runs so well, it runs those, because you see what we're dealing with right now. I think folks in MIF, one, they think dead, because they're also like gambling as investors, and politicians who are holding public office also want to be investors in business, so they have control. If there had been legislation which stopped them from doing this, maybe then it would be better. You want to give me some information?
I wanted to give actually an example, especially when you use the medical field. For those of us that have people who go to these public facilities, in villages and wherever, I'm sure you've actually heard stories like, I needed a scan, and I was told that the machine at the hospital is dead, and so I was referred to a private facility.
Exactly.
Or I went there and they didn't have this medicine, and I was referred to a private facility to buy the medicine. Or even in terms of the clinic, I went there, I met this doctor, and he told me, okay, you go to this clinic, I'll work on you from there. So that is really, practical examples on which we face, all of us, on a daily basis.
I also had an experience. I had a patient at the casualty ward, went there, and the doctor told me there was a certain equipment which was needed, and it was not in Mulago, but it could be found in a certain hospital where he was going. When I called the person in charge of the neuro department at Mulago, the machine was found inside Mulago, and the patient was worked on. But now let's go to the comments that are coming in from the listeners. We already have a number of them, and we'll be weighing. You'll be weighing and responding to some of them. We begin with this comment that is coming in from Musinguzi, who is listening in from Kira municipality. He says, yes, Mr. Lukwago, Operation Wealth Creation is the Kapeka team. That is when you know there is something wrong. Rationalization is good, but would you follow that advice from Kapeka? Why all this hypocrisy? Why don't we begin with the cabinet, the many local governments? Government has many contradictory policies that we, the followers, have forgotten the difference between a good and a bad policy. That's a comment from Musingos in Kira municipality. Spectrum Xtra, using the profit yardstick to assess the performance of UCDA is erroneous. English adage, liars should have good memories and omulimba asange omukiriza. Reason vis-a-vis emotion and suppression. That's a comment from Lumbuye Lawrence, who is listening again from Zigoti. Another comment, good evening Kenneth and the panelists. George from Bunga, I thought that a law must be pro-people, but to my surprise, even to the so-called elite, they were defending an illegality of passing the law which citizens were not supporting. But because of pettiness, we had the president went ahead, because of the tough stance of the president, they went ahead and passed the bill. In fact, I have instructed my lawyer to weigh in on the merit of this bill and institute the case against those involved into this illegality. Secondly, I urge voters to take in interest to vote out all those who supported this bill. We like we did with Toji Kwatako, and those MPs should take lessons from the 70% who lost their seats by going against citizens' will. Let's wait for them come 2026. And President Yoweri Museveni is also saying those who oppose the bill should be politically punished in 2026. The president has been wrong about key issues about coffee. His decision to give Pineti a pivotal role, not only in health but also coffee, is what makes people uneasy about this one person decisions. Museveni never admits to making any mistake ever. Giving 30 billion to people with no track record on coffee to build a coffee plant in Tungamo, his direct area of origin, was irresponsible. If he wants to streamline, let me suggest 2 areas to save us a ton of money. Get government out of providing transport for civil and the public servants, help them acquire their private vehicles, give them fuel and service allowance, and you will save 2 trillion shillings per year. Eliminate corruption, which according to the IGG costs the taxpayers $5.4 million every day. That is 2 trillion per year. That's enough money to cover our entire budget, pay all civil servants a living wage, and leave UCDA where it is. That's John listening in from Nakawa. Peter Inikisasi, why don't we go full blast by rationalizing all the authorities, e.g. Petroleum back to Ministry of Energy, Uganda Revenue Authority back to Ministry of Finance, doing away with the positions of RDCs, deputy RDCs, assistant RDCs. This is where there is blatant duplication of roles, etc. This will calm down the current tension in the minds of the coffee farmers.
Anderson, on that point, I'm
going to give you an opportunity to respond.
There's other agencies on public
scale.
Scrutiny. They will have nobody rooting for them to stay.
All right. Good evening. Good evening, Spectrum Xtra.
People 5 URA gone.
UCDA was ensuring high quality assurance and quality control over the whole value chain. Looking at the Minister of Agriculture, despite the so-called extension workers, operational wealth creation, NADS, etc., they have failed to be sensitive on some of these issues. They have failed to train and maintain quality in the prepaid post-harvest of the produce. Look at the drying millet, beans, cassava, maize, etc. on bare ground. Hence, this point is critical for the coffee. UCDA had achieved this. I don't see it any better with agriculture unless just to target and benefit the already established coffee traders that want to monopolize the trade. That's a comment from Joseph. We have another one here. Good evening, Anderson and our guest this evening. Thank you for the talk show. I have a general comment. RAPEX was a good thing. These agencies had it simply become too many with a lot of duplication. Whenever we failed to fix mainstream government, we created an authority. However, we got the RAPEX process wrong. First, the name should have been RAPEX, but stopping leakage and misuse of funds. In that case, the question would have been, what is the greatest source of leakage and misuse? Then we go for that. We all know corruption is the real issue we need to tackle head on. As it is, we have turned our eyes away from it. I hope there will be phase 2 of RAPEX. Then we have another comment, the last one at this stage. A cup of coffee goes for $7 in Europe. Can the government explain why they are cheating our people? I will run the ads from this side. And somebody has, well, if a copy of coffee goes for $7 in Europe, can the government explain why they are cheating our people? Well, that's the last comment we have at this particular moment, but we're going for a break now. When we return, we'll get responses from the panelists. Stay tuned, Radio 1 FM 90. Spectrum Extra continues after this break. Well, thank you so much for staying with us on Spectrum Extra, live on Radio 1 FM 90, reviewing the major events of the week. We've just been focusing on the final decision taken by Parliament on UCDA, and what we know, Parliament did pass that UCDA Amendment Act. The same day, they also passed the UNRWA Amendment Bill, and what we know, the rationalization process continues, and the government is determined to see it through, despite a number of people questioning the motive and also raising concern about this particular process. Well, gentlemen, let's wrap up our discussion on this issue and then move on to another topic. And I'll come to you, Job, very quickly. What will be your closing observations on this particular topic before we move on?
For me, I want to actually agree with a number of callers that have actually pushed us to try and look at this RAPEX exercise from the perspective of targeting the wrong targets. In that you have entities that actually are doing so well, and you are forcing them to go back under ministries that are dysfunctional or that are, I could say, incompetent. And you're leaving the actual areas where we are seeing the leakages or the bloated cost of public expenditure. One would wonder why, as the RAPEX exercise, which has been going on, I think, for 2 to 3 years now, is being pushed through, somebody comes up and appoints 300 plus extra RDCs, whose role has actually been challenged by a number of us that have been engaging on the grassroots, because you realize that these RDCs have basically been playing a political role. These are more like mobilizers for the NRM. Let me say to be that exact, who are mobilizing for the NRM, but charging the taxpayer for their political work. So I think we need to rethink this whole RAPEX exercise and ask the question: where exactly do we need to be focusing? Are we really focusing on the right targets, or we are actually shooting in the wrong direction? The second thing that I want, as we wrap up this, is to really get us as Ugandans to pick an interest into this business of passing laws at gunpoint. The trend that we seem to be following, whereby parliamentarians, in order for some of these things to actually go through, people must be beaten. The other day I was watching the clips yesterday, but one. Electricity was switched off in Parliament. For those of us that make WhatsApp calls, I don't know that you realize that they actually were jammed. Was it yesterday?
So you are in touch with the
Or
MPs, you're trying to make calls?
No. I mean, even calling Peter, who has just arrived, I could not actually call him. Okay? That guns have to enter Parliament. Okay? I didn't see them, but at least people that were there.
In the chambers?
In the chambers.
There was a process to establish that, and
yes,
there was no gun. According to the how the people were checked.
Well, there are people who say the guns were there. So for me, I can actually.
The Speaker ordered a search, and the people who had been pointed at were not found with the guns.
We have seen a number of resolutions made in that house against even the popular vote in Parliament. So to go by what the Speaker said, I would really take that with a pinch of salt. But I mean, guns are going into Parliament, and this is not the first time. This seems to be the trend. And then we are seeing things, MPs passing these things at gunpoint, because you recall that this bill was actually supposed to be, was the engagement last week?
Yes, there was an engagement.
There was an engagement last week, which failed, and then people are called into Kisozi, and then the Riot Act is ready for them, and then they're given instructions, and they come to Parliament, and then guns are removed for them to pass laws. So I think for me, in terms of our democracy, we need to actually be questioning why we are allowing this trend to continue. Why is there a growing trend of MPs passing laws at gunpoint?
All right, our fourth panelist has joined us, Mr. Majela Peter Gwayaka, Executive Director at Development Network of Indigenous Voluntary Associations, DENIVA. He's also a lawyer. Peter, I'm sure you've been listening to us as you were coming in your car. Very quickly, let's, Job, you can land your point, and then we hear very quickly from Majela before we move on from this topic.
The last thing which actually I wanted to talk about is really to hear from Augustine why these coffee factories in Ntungamo. I would like to understand what the statistics in terms of coffee farming in Ntungamo. Because yet actually, as far as I understand from the limited knowledge I have about coffee, there's a lot of coffee activity happening in eastern Uganda, in Bugisu to be specific, and also in Buganda. So I'm wondering why. I think it is. I saw it's Spire word on the map. I don't know that you drew it, but there was a graphic expression of how coffee will travel to and from Uganda. That it has to travel all the way from Mbale, go through Wakiso, go through I think Mpiji, go through Masaka. Go through Masaka, Mpiji, Masaka, and then go through Mbarara, then to Ntungamo. And then after it returns through the same route and goes to the border in Busia. And I'm wondering, why does coffee have to take this whole long trek in order to be exported out of this country? If this was a strategic investment for the country, shouldn't it have been placed in one of the large coffee growing areas? So I just want to understand from Augustine, what do the statistics look like in terms of coffee growing in this country?
Thank you very much, my brother. I think I would also get the opportunity to respond to some of the concerns.
Yes, very quickly.
Well, you see, the president gives figures that we earn from coffee. He says the world earns about $460 billion from coffee. Africa earns only 2.5 billion from the 460 billion. And Uganda gets, of the 2.5 that Africa is getting, Uganda gets only a share of $900 million. And he goes ahead and says, we get this minimum amount, which is about 0.2% of the world coffee market, because we export coffee beans. We do not export coffee that is added value. So the president is saying that we must get out of the exportation of the raw material and we get into value addition.
Agreed.
And I think
but
this
man has this question.
Very
Let me actually bring him. Let me bring him to speed. Agreed. We all agree that we need to add value. We need to export finished goods in order to bring in more money. But the question Job was putting across, do you have any information as to why the factories in Ntungamo, not in Bugisu, not in Buganda, and all these other coffee growing areas?
A factory can be located anywhere.
Okay.
A factory
but
can be located anywhere.
Let's allow him to explain.
A factory can be located anywhere. We used to grow cotton across eastern and northern Uganda, but the processing was done in Jinja. We used to grow tobacco. West Nile used to grow tobacco, but there was no factory adding value in West Nile.
You're not answering
and
the question.
It was
this
being
man,
done here in
Augustine,
Kampala.
the question
So
was
In Lida, there was
answer the question
there was
specifically.
a cotton factory. There was ginning in Lida.
Yes, but you see, the point I'm making is that where the factory is located may not necessarily be an issue. The issue here is, do we add value to our coffee and we are able to export?
For the record, we are actually
I come from Hoima.
Yes, there is an increasing number of people in Ankole who have gotten into coffee.
I come from
You can check the figures.
I come from Hoima. Okay.
Yes.
If the oil refinery had been set up in Bugisu, I would actually have a problem with that. And I think there would be a problem with us as a country. If the oil refinery had been set up in Bugisu, there would be a problem. Why? Because the oil is being extracted from
Bulisa and Hoima.
Bulisa, Bunyoro.
Yes.
You get it?
Yes.
So if that factory was in Bugisu, there would actually a very big problem with us. So that's the question I'm asking.
Yes,
why,
the point I'm making.
That question is bigger than
No. The point I'm making. The point I'm making.
And I have no ill feelings about the Ntungamo. All right.
Yes.
Let me help Augustine. Let me help Augustine.
The question is
There was a potential investor who heard about the outcry of the president over value addition in coffee. He went with a bankable project and was given funding, and the factory ended up in his area.
And that investor
Let's bring it forward.
Are there no coffee farmers in Angola?
in Buganda.
Are there no coffee farmers in Angola?
Let's bring it, Mr. Vajera.
The point is, coffee today is not only grown in Buganda. Even in the northern, I was surprised recently to look at the figures.
Augustine, if you insist,
Just a minute.
Augustine, if you insist,
you'll do
on carrying on like this.
All right.
these questions are gonna get. They're not going to.
No,
stop.
Peter, see, I was making a point. I was making a point.
Please conclude it.
That I was very surprised that in the last 5 years, OWC and UCDA had distributed over 4 million seedlings of coffee in northern Uganda. So, in other words, the coffee growing is not necessarily
Augustine,
an aspect of one region.
It is okay. It is okay not to have the answer.
Maybe
okay.
what we can do. Maybe what we
okay.
can do is to advocate for more factories to be set up in
Exactly.
this
That- that should be the point.
Peter.
It is okay,
Okay,
not to have an answer.
good evening, listeners, and sorry, I apologize for coming late. I'll begin from Augustine's point. Actually, Western Uganda has a relatively fair production of coffee, and I would wish we expand that to other regions, like we have factories in other regions. We
And
see-
for the record, do you grow
we
coffee
see
in your area?
So I'm a coffee farmer in
Okay.
Kasenda, and I've been listening. I'm a coffee farmer. I
Kasenda
farm
is an
tea,
industry.
and I do milk production. And I want you to reflect on this. 1986, Uganda's major cash crops were tea, tobacco, cotton, and coffee. There was a tea authority, like UCDA. It was closed in 2006. Last year, we stopped planting tea, and in my area, I do tea in Kijura of Kabarole district. More than 6 factories have closed, and one of them belonging to Mukwano has been turned into a hotel.
Wow.
Tea authority was closed in 2006. There was tobacco. It came from West Nile and part of Bunyoro. The authority for tobacco was BAT. It closed. I don't know how much tobacco we have today. Then there was cotton, and there was Link Marketing Board, and it was closed. I don't know how much cotton we have today. Basically, when you look at the traditional cash crops, I think it's only coffee which still had an authority and which still was a power.
Which had also been closed.
And it had been closed, and then it had been turned into UCDA. And now, probably from history, we can tell from cotton, tobacco, tea, we could probably predict what might happen to coffee moving forward. This government spent 40 years telling us it's a bad business entity, telling us we can't do business as a government, we can't run things. Even the reason why we created all those authorities, government was saying we are poor, we are poor managers. So once we are convinced that they are the poorest of managers, now they are saying no, we are the best managers. In my farm, I've had issues where I've interacted both with Operation Wealth Creation and UCDA. Operation Wealth Creation registered me. They came to the farm, found my workers, registered me, and dumped, I think they dumped around 1,000 seedlings of coffee. I asked them, what is the source? I wouldn't bring disease to my farm, so I told them I need to know the source. They brought them, I think it was in December, in the middle of the dry season. So I told them to take away their seedlings. They threatened me with all kinds of things, but it was later dumped at the sub-county. Whether they are surviving up to now, I don't know, and it's a question I would love to ask him. You just talked about 4 million seedlings distributed in northern Uganda. How many of those are still coffee? Because there is this telling us about figures. We distributed 1 million seedlings, but are they still alive, or they all dried up? The last time the president talked about OWC, I think that was around COVID time, where he gave statistics that 78% of the seedlings they had distributed had actually dried up. And I don't know if that is
Even in his first speech, he agreed to that.
And I don't know if that is considered a success. So what is 78% of 4 million?
That's about 3
million.
something.
Yeah.
So that might mean if we distributed 4 million, only about 300 seedlings might still be alive. Now, let's look at the issues of the rationale for rationalization. One, they said they want to cut duplication. Do you know, my other life, I'm a lawyer, and there's no law that establishes operation wealth creation. Maybe if I'm guided, one might have been made, or one might be made on gunpoint tonight if Parliament can be convened. But so we are removing an entity created by law and giving its mandate to an entity created by will.
An illegal entity.
That's an interesting one to me, because I don't see any, I don't know, maybe you'll guide us which law creates operation wealth creation.
So is SFC.
So, but then one of the rationale was we are removing duplication. So if you have two entities duplicating service, one is created by law and another is not created by law, which of the two should be going?
Yeah.
Two, the other one was cutting costs. I like to explain cutting costs in this way. Where I come from, it used to be called Kabarole District. It was split into Kabarole, Fort Portal City, Bunyangabu, recently. I will stop at those three. When we had one regional referral hospital, which was left by whites, it's still one. It had 2 doctors, it still has 2 doctors. When they split, because they were bringing services closer, so we have 2 doctors which were there when it was still one district, and we have 8 RDCs, because we have RDCs, their deputies and their assistants in that small area. So that's how we increased the services. We created, so we have like 8 RDCs, we have with the assistants, we have I don't know how many DPCs might be, but I don't know if we need DPCs. We need more policemen than DPCs.
You have PISOs.
PISOs, yes, all.
Gomborola
So we
chief.
have this whole administrative useless. I will use useless, and I'm not apologetic about that. Hope I'm not banned from appearing here again. We have all this useless administrative structure, which
That's
is
subjective.
repetitive. And it's so repetitive, like for every major government department, the only state house departments we don't have in this country is a state house department in charge of parliament and a state house department in charge of judiciary. But
Well,
even then, the judiciary has been taken
Mr.
over. because-
Mr. Otuko here is a private secretary in charge of political affairs. You may not know exactly
So, in other words,
the politics he plays.
for every department that we have to provide a service somewhere, you have anti-corruption, you have IGG, you have an IGG of State House. You have something in lands, we have something in lands in State House. Everything.
You have
You
You have an attorney general in cabinet. You have a legal advisor in State House.
In State House.
Mm.
So, realistically, why don't we look at those ones? And then, if we are sincere about
Rationalization.
and cost cutting,
Mm.
why don't we look
First
at
cut
those
those
ones
costs.
and first cut those costs? Then the other thing, as I conclude, I sometimes have crazy ideas. Colleagues in studios, if we abolished this parliament, do you think we'll fail to pass the laws that we've passed?
No, would we lose anything?
Looking at what happened yesterday.
We lose anything.
So
Assuming-
you'll be giving the president the power to rule by decree, and then you'll complain again.
But as
As
it
a-
is-
as a law.
What's happening right now?
No, I mean,
Well, that's subjective.
It's like this.
subjective.
Let's look at this. Parliament
Crazy idea.
sat
Hey.
and said we are. Let's wait for UCDA.
Mm.
And they said, no. Come to Chisozi.
So yes.
You're not going to wait. Parliament comes back and says, yes, we are not going to wait. You look at how many people have called parliamentarians, especially in Uganda here. It has been a big issue with coffee in Buganda,
Eh.
telling the parliamentarians, let's not pass this law. And so, do we have the will? If you look at yesterday's debate, do we have the will of the people? Even in the debate, let's not go to the passing of the law. Do we have the will of the people in the debate, or do we have the will of someone somewhere
You're very hopeful.
who
You're very optimistic.
who is
individual.
that?
All right.
So that's why I'm saying if we abolished parliament, we'll suffer no loss.
It's
I-
because
actually,
Peter,
Peter, I totally agree with you.
That
I totally
unconstitutional.
No, I totally agree with
It's
Peter.
unconstitutional,
Eh.
but it's so unconstitutional to pass laws punching parliamentarians.
All right. Let's take in more comments coming in from the listener. Somebody writes and says, thanks, Kenneth, for hosting the gentleman in studio. The point UCDA is gone. What can we do to protect coffee not to be owned by one particular individual in form of penalty? We have another comment. Good evening, Kenneth. Please don't forget the Busoga sugar cane, the goats, the tea, etc. Minister of Agriculture is dead. That's John Kyanja. We have another comment. Good evening, Spectrum Xtra, and thank you for the show about UCDA merger. His Excellency the President reiterated its creation was temporarily, and he went further to allege that UCDA staff are parasites. My question isn't he the one who appointed them and thus failed to crack the whip? 2, he avers that he got a report from Operation Wealth Creation, which is also headed by one general who happens to be his own brother. Did he expect him to manage UCDA very well when he knew Operation Wealth Creation could never write a fair report in support of UCDA for obvious reason, money? That's Kamogo Fred Keta listening from Kira Municipality. The gentleman from the President's office should clear this distortion. UCDA was created after Coffee Marketing Board was dissolved. UCDA was created to regulate the liberalized coffee sector. I think Dr. Sruma's article clarified the distortion by that gentleman. It's not good for some of you people from President's office to go public on radio and begin telling lies. Well, good evening, Spectrum Extra and the panelists in studio. Wilson Bikakanga Muyenga is my name. We must agree Dr. Sruma is 1000% very right. We in private business are on high competition with civil servants, and we are being driven out of business. I think was referring to Dr. Sorunkuma, not Dr. Sruma. Ask us who work for those bank officials and civil servants to tell you what these people do. The same people have the leverage of evading taxes, because when we charge them VAT, they show us that they don't pay, or else they take business away. This behavior has killed the taxpayers because we can't compete with our regulators in all business spheres. All people that were paraded yesterday are beneficiaries of illicit business in coffee. Raila Charles listening in from Nairobi. Thank you very much for joining us, Raila. He says it's not okay to say that all people don't support the bill and yet we support it. Noise around the MPs who don't know the game of politics, whether you are right, but we go with the majority. Let them stop scaring people about elections in 2026. He's the only one voting, is as if he is the only one voting in all areas of those MPs. And he says that childish talk needs to stop. Ojambo Ronald listening in from Mengo. Ojambo Ronald Mengo listening in from Entebbe. It's selfishness of this government to frustrate Ugandans from earning any meaningful living. What happened to fisheries that once belonged to Ugandans? What happened to ranches where they not amalgamated with agriculture? How convincing is this government to lie to Ugandans? We are indeed doomed. Serunkuma wants a law that bars public servants from having private investments. Sadly, he makes such a proposition with a lot of English and accent. Seriously? That's a question. Then somebody writes in, it's now 25 years, President Yoweri Museveni was giving free coffee seedlings. They were even getting rotten and perish when people are tired of it. Then the last comment at this moment, the mob justice against Otuko in studio needs to be regulated.
I agree.
Very quickly, Otuko, and then we hear from
Well, I want to say this. The RAPEX debate is a very good debate. And I want to say that the issues that the listeners have raised about other agencies and ministries are things that government should look into, and as we journey to the future. The other issue that I want to raise about this debate is that I think where the problem came is when a section of MPs wanted to tribalize the conversation. The report of OWC presented to the president was not about UCD as an agency alone. It was about several agencies. And when the report was presented to cabinet, the cabinet was able to look into various agencies, and some of them, they said, should be given transitional period because of the role they were playing. However, they all agreed with the report that most of these agencies must go, but absorb some of these workers who are working in these agencies, in UNRWA, in UCD and others, into the respective ministries, so that if those individuals were effective in the agencies, they will also be effective in the ministries. And I think that is what I wanted to say. The last one is that coffee is no longer a monopoly of one region. Several regions now in eastern Uganda. Recently, we visited a farmer in Palisa that is growing coffee in 9 acres. And I think he's a retired civil servant who used to work with government, and the coffee is doing very well in Palisa. And I think years to come, this coffee will no longer be a debate of one section of a community. It is a product that many people are now growing in Ankole, in Acholi, in West Nile. Very many farmers have gotten engaged in coffee. So when we are debating about UCDA and coffee, we should look at it as a national product, as a product that the whole country is producing, and we should be able to appreciate that this exercise of RAPEX is a national exercise that intends to streamline government agencies.
But Augustine, who is disputing the fact that coffee is now a national crop? It's grown nationally.
Yeah,
I think that is in response to my question.
Yes.
Because you see, yes, we totally agree that coffee is being grown everywhere. But
Yes.
you see, from my limited economics understanding,
Yes.
if I were to set up a factory, I would put it where the raw material is easily accessible. I will not get a factory and put it far away from the concentration of the raw material.
But the question
so the question I am asking
Yes.
is, what was the logic, what was the rationale of getting, you see, we look at economies of scale in economics, okay? So what was the rationale of getting a coffee factory and putting it in a location where, yes, there's coffee growing, but the concentration seems not to be there. It seems to be elsewhere. So what was that?
But you see,
for that factory to be set up there?
You see, when you go to Western Uganda, if you are able to project the future, Western Uganda will be one of the regions that will be producing more coffee competitive to Uganda. It's a fact. If you go there, almost every person is getting.
Wow.
So you see, but the question is that a government factory?
No, yes, it is a government factory.
You see,
I can actually argue that it's a government factory because it's using state resources.
Does the state have?
It is using taxpayers' money. It was set up using taxpayers' money.
you see, comrades, across the world.
No, we are not your comrades.
Yeah.
Augustine,
Yeah.
we are not.
Yes, you're not comrades. What I want to say is that across the world, governments deliberately invest in citizens that have ideas that can progress the economy. It's deliberate.
But the ideas must make logical sense.
Yes, I mean, it is logical. I am not telling you.
So
But when you do projections, when you look at how many people are getting into coffee production in Western Uganda, you cannot discount it.
All right, Spectrum
You
Extra.
cannot.
if I'm
I had a
like,
question.
gentlemen,
You
let's
cannot, but that does not mean that does not.
very visible.
And
That does not mean that does not mean
Are the projections showing that coffee growing in Buganda will actually be going down? And
No, that's the point I was coming. That's the point I was coming.
let's go for the ad break.
Putting a factory in Ntungamo does not discount the fact that there are coffee opportunities in Uganda that
All right,
you may
all right.
you may actually
Spectrum
invest in
Extra will
other
continue
factories.
after this break.
Augustine, where is that OWC report?
Well, it was a classified report.
Asking for it.
It was a classified report made to the president and presented to cabinet.
So there is,
Yes.
Before you
there
go,
is a government
asking
report.
for the report.
There's a government report. You guys are referring to, you want citizens to follow what the report said, but you're not giving it to citizens.
But also,
The sound from the other studio is faint, so
Yes.
I need to be able to tell
Yes.
when we are going back on air. So kindly.
Like you said, you're asking a very complicated question above his pitching.
no. But
No,
you see,
we're above him.
but you see,
So
once
citizens,
Well, thank you so much for staying with us on Spectrum Extra Live on Radio 1 FM 90, reviewing the major events of the week. We've spent about 1.5 hours discussing the issue of rationalization, but in particular looking at UCDA, and I hope we can now move on. Yusuf, you had one final comment to make.
Like 2 small points. And I think Peter, gave us live examples from the area where he comes from, and also that he's a farmer himself. And he speaks to the point I made earlier, that we're not having a technical conversation. This is not a technical thing. We're dealing with politics. And for me, I think we're looking for control. The one who controls the means of subsistence basically have an upper hand in controlling the decisions that men take. So that's what Museveni has showed us, is that he had lost control of the thing in which many people, 12 million Ugandans, are now getting a good subsistence. So he has to return to reclaim control over it. And the final point is the point that he raised about dissolving parliament. And again, in the terrain of politics, we're dealing with a modern autocrat. Peter, I want you to listen to this one, because a modern autocrat doesn't govern by decree. A modern autocrat governs through what appears like democracy. Right? So the autocrat actually needs a parliament to operate. He can't, because you see, because the facade will disappear. The autocrat of today tends to be a weak individual who governs through pretense. You see, the men who are autocratic, they didn't need parliaments, they need a press, they just need to work for their people. Now, what we're dealing with is a people, we go through these elections. We don't go through elections because it's about us. It's not really about us. It's about the way power is structured nowadays, that you have to have a parliament, you have to have a seemingly free press. You could let folks like us sit around here and debate and talk. It all doesn't matter, right? At the end of the day, the man who controls the tools of violence will be like, this is what I want. So perhaps I thought the more radical idea would be citizens setting fire on that parliament. but the man himself dissolving it, that's not going to happen, because he needs it for his continuity. So I think that point is very clear, that as long as that thing exists, that's the tool of
Burkina Faso style, eh? It happened in Burkina Faso.
Sure, he needs it.
All right.
for rubber stamping.
All right, very quickly, just one minute. We need to actually move on.
Yeah,
We need to move on.
I wanted to correct the distortion by my brother Peter here.
Maybe say you want to respond to the view of Peter.
Peter tries to bring out a view that actually dissolving UCDA is handing it over to OWC, which is not correct. OWC simply played a role which any Ugandan could actually play and say, I have studied this governance system or this agency system, and I feel it is not the best way. We could be able to rationalize them. So rationalization, by rationalizing UCDA, they are taking it back to the mother ministry. It is not to the OWC. Basically, that's what I wanted to correct.
All right.
But just a moment.
All right.
There is this whole falsehood about taking things back to the ministry. And as a lawyer, I would request you read Section 2 of the UCDA Act, passed just last year. It defines the minister as the minister in charge of agriculture, and it reports to the minister. So when you are talking about taking it back, where? Where has it been? It's been under the ministry. Who has been appointing the ED of USDA, Uganda Coffee Development Authority? Who has been appointing its board of directors? Who has been appointing its secretary? It's been the minister. So,
well, maybe just to say this, Peter, the president actually gives an alternative view in one of his writings recently. He says, let's say having an agency is good, but should we have an agency for every product? Should we have one for millet, one for maize, sorghum, and so on? So I think the president is saying, even if we are to have an agency, can we have an agency that encompasses all other products that we produce through agriculture? Basically, that's the alternative view the president was giving.
All right, we need to move on, and I will begin on this topic with your use of the issue of the U.S. elections and what has happened. The use of the issues of the elections in the U.S. Many people dismissed Trump. People thought he will not make it. Against all odds, he actually scores highly, and what do you know? We are now discussing.
I don't know what you mean when you say many people dismissed him, that he will not win.
All right.
You see, and I think that's the problem for us who live in Uganda. We only watch CNN and the BBC. Like, we watch supposedly what is called the liberal left, right? And lefties live in a bubble which has been shrinking over a period. And I could locate this maybe 20 years ago with the birth of the internet, because the liberal left controlled the means of information, the publishing presses, they controlled media, they controlled newspapers. Now, with the rise of the internet, information is everywhere, and what has happened to the liberal left is that they've still denied us access to what the other voices are saying, unless you look so hard, what is often called dissident literature. But majority, the rest of the world actually knew Donald Trump was going to win. But because we are endlessly bombarded with liberal left talking points, right, from CNN, BBC, and when you listen to Uganda punditry, because we watch these channels, we never look beyond these mainstream outlets. We are pounded endlessly that the Democrats are in charge of the things. But the man ran a nationalist campaign, and everybody in the United States agrees, and the rest of the country also. I think outside of the U.S., people have gotten used to the reproduction of these two individuals, between the Republicans and the Democrats, that it doesn't really mean much. It was only when Trump came in that you saw differences. The 4 years he didn't start any single war. Barack Obama threw so many bombs on Pakistan, the Middle East, than Bush combined in his first term. Donald Trump did not do any of the things. You see, so when you say many people knew the Democrats were going to win, I disagree, and I think the problem is because we watch the mainstream channels, which are mostly controlled by the liberal left. Implications for Uganda, Anderson. I've argued before, and in most of my writing, that the American foreign policy is not dependent on individuals. You see, our African presidents have so much power that Western presidents just admire. Right? A change of president, a change of prime minister in the Western world doesn't change much in the ways in which things are run. In terms of policy, especially foreign policy. Like, if you look at the last maybe 50 years, American foreign policy towards the Middle East hasn't changed. And the last 70 years, American foreign policy towards Israel hasn't changed. Towards Africa, they see us as a country, and I've argued that we need to see ourselves as a country, Africa. The policies after the collapse of the USSR in 1980 have largely remained the same. For Uganda, it was going to be the same. Because you see, as long as Museveni is still our president, Museveni understood, because he becomes president after the collapse of the USSR, Museveni understood that for you to stay in power, you have to hand over the economy to Western powers. So what Museveni has done, quite to perfection, is when Mzungu says jump, his only question is how high. So, and this has continued through the different presidents of the U.S. because the foreign policy doesn't change, and all they want from Africa is loyalty from the presidents, right? So you have a spectrum of what we've done as Uganda. We are selling mercenaries to Afghanistan, we are in the Central African Republic, we are in Sudan, we are in DRC, we are in Somalia. Basically, we are the force for hire for the United States. Nowadays, we're even buying refugees in exchange for money. The poorest country in the world has what they call the refugee heaven. The poorest country in the world is the only country in the world which has this open border policy. Basically, for Uganda, as long as the elite, the bureaucracy of the United States still sees Uganda as a place where they've been allowed a free reign, I don't see much changing.
Dr. Yusuf, what's your comment on this message? President Yoweri Museveni earlier today congratulated Donald Trump. He said, Your Excellency Donald Trump, President-elect the U.S., Your Excellency, I'm writing on behalf of the people of Uganda to congratulate you on the historic victory you achieved on the 8th of November 2024 by winning both the popular and electoral college votes. Your victory was a true reflection of the feeling of the majority of the citizens in the U.S. We, the freedom-loving people of Uganda, look forward to mutually beneficial engagement with your administration. You are in service for peace and mutually beneficial cooperation. Signed, Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, General Retired President of the Republic of Uganda.
That's a normal message. There's nothing special about that. That's a normal diplomatic message that many presidents are sending. That could be, you could take off Museveni's name and you can put in the other name. It sounds very normal to me. There's nothing unique. There's nothing appealing to the sanctions.
Nothing punctuated.
No, I mean, you could say, under different regime, we're struggling with sanctions, our men were sanctioned, our Speaker Palmer was sanctioned. That's very mainstream, typical diplomatic message. And I think the reality of that is that we don't really matter much. There's no nuance specific to Uganda. You can take up Museveni's name and put in the other name.
The Biden's administration removed us from the list of AGOA, had sanctions on our people here, including the Speaker. Is there something that's likely to
he doesn't speak to that, because it would be very unnecessary, but also because that's American foreign policy. And as I said, it is run by a network which is intact, which is not necessarily changing depending on who is in power. And Anderson, this point is really serious. Our African presidents have so much power than leaders in the Western world. Because you see, Trump could sign a document in one state, he will say it's not going to work. You can't do that here. You see, whatever Museveni signs has to work for the entire country. You see, it can't. Those countries where they can actually run, it's fair to say, I agree with people who have said, maybe for the last 1 year with Joe Biden looking very frail and suffering, I think, dementia, they've had no president for the entire time, and the country has been working perfectly. Right? So, Western world leaders don't have much power, and the foreign policy is run by networks of experts which don't really reflect the interests of individual leaders.
All right. Let's hear from Peter. Peter Goyaka, your take on this. Should we expect something different? What kind of relationship should we expect from the U.S. and the African continent, but also Uganda in particular, looking at how the relations have been? Anything that you think is likely to change?
Okay, I think I will begin from a misconception which I saw the speaker put out, and I've heard many people say about sanctions. By the way, Trump sanctioned more Ugandans than Biden. Kale Kaihura, Masal Museni, there were about 5 in that force. So in terms of thinking that there will be no sanctions because of human rights violations, because this time it's Trump, that's just wishful thinking. They are likely to continue. For the one reason is that I forget the name of the law which U.S. uses, the Magnitsky Act, is there and it will be enforced. So let's not think there will be no sanctions. That will be there. Now, let's look at what the U.S., in specific to Uganda, what the U.S. and Uganda does. If you ask an ordinary Ugandan, like, what U.S. product do you see on the Ugandan market, probably that will give you 0. There's nothing. So what
Democracy.
U.S. products?
Democracy.
U.S. is an interesting country, so it tries to play good boy by democracy and then push in other things. If you look, statistics say we import mostly vaccines and medical-related things from the U.S. That accounts for about 70% of U.S. sales into Uganda. And then U.S. funds, the biggest fund, U.S. fund into Uganda is medical. So basically they send the money here and it buys equipment back. I don't think that's going to stop because it literally goes back into the U.S. economy. where they employ a few Ugandans, and then there will be this U.S. citizen who is an expert earning 10 times the next Ugandan in line. So that is going to continue for one reason: it's creation of jobs, and that is in line with Trump's policy, by the way. When Trump came to power the last term, his interest was trade, and his interest with Africa was still trade. And like I've explained, the U.S. does not trade directly. They tend to use those indirect means. If you went online right now, you can find what we get from Germany, what we get from the UK, but you will be hard hit to get what we get from the US because it's mainly medical. So that's what is going to happen. The other issue that we need to think about seriously is Trump's position on immigrants. And I think many people seem to talk about it in abstract. We have so many Ugandans who move to the US or who are in the US. And actually, the money they send back is quite a significant sum. Trump's policy on immigration, if people are looking at it vis-a-vis Latinos, maybe we need to start looking at it vis-a-vis Ugandans or vis-a-vis Africans, because that's going to be affected. There's no question about that. So we are likely to see less remittances, even less people running to the US. Of course, less people running to the US, it could also play into the politics of the day, because a number of opposition people who have had challenges here and there have run to the US. But from the economic side, so of course that also means the families that depend on them might have a few hiccups here and there. The other aspect of Trump, which I see coming, and is a bit sad news for environmentalists, is his desire to invest in minerals and hydrocarbons, oil and gas. Of course, one positive thing, we might see some American companies, American banks. Remember, all the campaign against ECOP was trying to say don't because of environmental issues. And a number of banks, including US banks, had said we are not going to fund ECOP. Maybe there might be a change of heart because now it's official, but it all ends in one thing: it must benefit the US. It doesn't care whether Uganda gains or not.
All right, very quickly, let's hear from you, Job.
I think for me, Peter, on the contrary, you see, of course, Trump, when he's speaking, he's a politician, okay? Politicians by nature, they make so many promises which they can't actually successfully push through, or they may not be able to implement. So on the question of immigration, I know for a fact that the US needs these migrants. I don't know that are they called migrants or immigrants, more than actually these. We need to go there because the US has a labor crisis. If you look at the so-called black jobs, did you call them black jobs? These Americans can't do those jobs. It is these people that are going there that can actually do them. And without those jobs being done, the economy actually suffers. I was recently watching a documentary on one of the TVs, and I noticed that I think it is Germany, Canada, and I think Australia, that are aggressively inviting foreigners into their economies to actually be able to do these jobs that would ordinarily, if they are not done, their economies are struggling. So right now, you see, it might sound sexy for Trump to really denigrate immigrants and then make all these false promises that he's going to stop them from coming in. But then at the end of the day, you realize that his economy cannot actually do with them. On the contrary, you may find that actually they'll have to open up to allow in more people than are going in. So when you look at this immigration thing, my take on it is that I think it is something that is, things that are dead on arrival. That probably is how I would classify this immigration thing. But to differ a bit with Yusuf and Peter, yes, on the one hand, I agree that the foreign policy may not change much, but there are certain elements where you will actually see some changes. if you look at the first 4 years of Trump, you realize that Trump was actually hands off Africa. Okay? And that, and usually maybe this is, it's usually the same, usually the Republicans are more like hands off Africa. I don't know how it is with the other continents, but the Democrats usually have a closer focus on the continent. And they are asking questions about human rights, governance, democracy, etc. Now, when you look at Trump with his hands off Africa, you and if you look at the people that are excited about the return of Trump, it's African strongmen that are really excited about it. If you look at the people that were the quickest to congratulate Trump, these are dictators, they are kleptocrats. So there's a reason as to why they're excited about it, because they know that with the Trump presidency, there's actually going to be less focus on us. So we are going to be given more like a blank check to do whatever we are doing in terms of abuse of human rights, the reverse of democracies, bad governance, anti-accountability. There's less focus on those critical elements for good governance and democracy. So I think as a country that actually is a candidate, which has, in a way, let me say, actually benefited from a democratic presidency in the US over the past 4 years, we are likely to see a reversal on our on the gains that we have made in terms of not that we've made so much gains, but you see the increasing focus by the US on some of the elements in our democracy, in our governance, in terms of the abuse of rights, the abuse of democracy, accountability. There's going to be less focus, and we are going to have, that's why you see, of course, the speaker yesterday was very quick to express her excitement that, you know, of course, naively, I found it quite strange that, and you see that points to the incompetent leaders that we have in these places. You have someone who doesn't even understand the process that is gone through to arrive at these sanctions, and what process we have to go through to actually have them removed. And of course she was affected. I mean, she the first time she traveled out of the country was when?
But
was
that does not mean that she's incompetent. She's entitled to her opinion.
No, I didn't say she's incompetent. I'm just talking about
when you say that the problem of having incompetent leaders in a certain place, this
man is also very hopeful about the US. He thinks US cares about democracy, US cares about human rights. You're also very naive in that.
All right, Otuko, your quick take.
Well, in 1960, Fidel Castro was asked which candidate he preferred between Kennedy and Nixon. And he replied, and I want to quote, that you cannot compare two shoes put on by one person. And he basically said that America is governed by one party with two wings. The left wing being the Democratic Party, with the I think the left wing being the Republican Party with the hardline, then the right shoe being the Democratic Party with the soft. But the objective, the goal, the strategy is the same. What differs are the tools and the means for achieving what they want. So basically the point I'm making is that irrespective of who is the president in the US, the interests of America will remain the same. Whatever they have planned to achieve in the 50 years, irrespective of who will lead them, will be achieved as they want. So basically the point is that Africa may not benefit much from Trump's presidency. Neither would it benefit if it was Harris, because for them it's about their interests first and what happens to you later. So basically that's the point. So as Africans, we should now look for trade. What is important for us, our interest should be focusing on trade. And I was reading the foreign policy proposals of Trump, and I realized that he's promising to engage more in trade with different continents, and I think Africa should look at it that way and negotiate for trade, but not aid.
All right, with that, we come to the end of Spectrum Extra this week. Let me thank you panelists for making time to be here. Yusuf, you look very sad. I don't know why. And you, the listeners, thank you very much for tuning in and contributing.
This country makes me sad every day.
particular
Let me tell you why I'm sad. You see a young man.